regional coordination of fisheries, policies, invasive species, and ecosystem restoration. Prior to joining the Great Lakes Fishery Commission Secretariat, Dr. Gaydon worked as a legislative assistant for the U.S. House of Representatives, Great Lakes Task Force, researching, proposing, and advocating legislation that benefits the Great Lakes region. He has worked as a legislative assistant and caseworker for U.S. Congressman Dennis M. Hertel, a Democrat from Michigan, specializing in Great Lakes environment, transportation, immigration, and Social Security issues. He's received a PhD from the University of Michigan School of Natural Resources and Environment in 2007, a Master of Arts degree in United States Foreign Policy from American University in 1993, and a Bachelor of Arts degree in History and Political Science from the University of Michigan in 1991. He's an adjunct professor at the School for Environment and Sustainability, University of Michigan, and an adjunct associate professor at the Department of Fisheries and Wildlife, Michigan State University. His research and teaching interests relate to the human dimensions of natural resource management. Currently, he teaches the course Global Water at the University of Michigan. I just paused because I realized University of Michigan and Michigan State are two rivals.
It's not Ohio State, so we're good.
Yeah, and Greg is a legislative liaison for the Great Lakes Fishery Commission. He grew up on a farm near the shore of Lake Huron before serving 25 years as a political aide to public officials, including the House of Commons Agricultural Committee, the vice chair of the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans, and a former Ontario Minister of Agriculture. Greg was a news broadcaster, municipal manager, and North Huron municipal councillor within the Great Lakes region. This involvement in public life along the shoreline gave Greg a deep understanding of complex issues such as invasive species, aquaculture, shipping, aquaculture and shipping through collaborations with groups such as Great Lakes Fishery Commission. This capacity was demonstrated on many occasions, including in 1998 when Greg assisted with the drafting of the Central Canada's Freshwater Fisheries Report as published by Canada's Parliament. From that foundation, Greg spent the next 20 years researching, writing, and communicating public policy and law both domestically and internationally. He has participated in several international exchanges, including delegations to China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and South Korea, and in 2006 was appointed as Scouts Canada's International Commissioner. During that time, he was awarded the IFA from the Korean Scout Association, and he is a recipient of the Cyril K. Gingrich Memorial Award. Greg holds a professional certificate in conflict management, a bachelor from Sprout School of Business, a Bachelor of Arts in Media and Communications. I'm sure he could tell us the acronym for UCW, and a Master of Political Management from Carleton University. Today, Greg enjoys spending time with his wife and 2 children at their home near London, Ontario, where he coordinates his activities and professional outreach as a legislative liaison for the Great Lakes Fishery Commission. So gentlemen, I turn it over to the both of you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Christy, for that introduction and also for organizing this. I'm Mark Gaydon, the Great Lakes Fishery Commission Secretariat, and I'll start this off, and then Greg will talk a little bit about the substance of the action plan, and then I'll conclude with some of the things that we're hoping to achieve from this particular webinar. I would be remiss in not restating the members of the steering committee, Strategy St. Laurent, the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Cities Initiative, Great Lakes Fishery Commission, Freshwater Future Canada, and the Council of the Great Lakes Region. I know 1 or 2 of those representatives of those organizations are on this. We got together several years ago after organizing a Great Lakes Day in Ottawa, talking about the benefit of there being an action plan, because those of us who go around and visit parliamentarian offices we're often told, well, what would you do with the money, or what's the plan, what's the goal? And interestingly enough, as I'll get to later, it was a similar question that those of us working in policy in the United States were asked a couple of decades ago. And we didn't have an answer then in the United States. Went through a very major process to come up with that answer, which I'll talk about. And we figured that, getting the same questions in Canada, we probably needed to come up with a better answer than the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence are worth protecting. So we approached Environment Canada a few years ago and got some funds to establish this collaborative process with the ultimate goal of producing the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Action Plan 2020-2030. What this plan is that it's an integrated vision for the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence River. It's the first that I know of where there's been that integrated vision, for starters. And second of all, it was an opportunity for us to focus on some major challenges facing the region. The ultimate goal, of course, is to increase investments in the protection of these resources. If those approaches could be innovative, all the better. And to certainly recognize the fact that we have orders of government that are involved and have key roles to play. Not everything is federal. In fact, as we know, with certain problems facing the Great Lakes, say beaches or high water and everything, there's a significant provincial and certainly a city's role to play. And we also acknowledge at the get-go the need for a significant amount of engagement, not only with the First Nations and experts in indigenous communities, but also with varying stakeholder groups that have a stake in the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence. That's our strength, actually, because you come up with a consensus view. The Environment Canada funds that were provided to do this process asked us to focus on some really 4 major challenges that are in the wheelhouse of Environment Canada. We recognize, of course, that there are other problems out there, invasive species, for example, being one that doesn't fit neatly into this, but nevertheless, the focus was on climate change, beach health, nutrients, and also toxics and harmful pollutants. The whole goal was to be inclusive, to come up with a vision and a plan that would represent not only the consensus of a wide range of interests, but also then subsequently some ownership in it, because it would reflect what folks believe need to be done to preserve and protect the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence region. As I'll get to in a minute, this was very much modeled after and inspired by the work in the United States through the Great Lakes Regional Collaboration and eventually the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, but I'll talk about that in a second. This was done in 2 phases. We started with the Great Lakes phase. Over the course of several months, we had some co-chairs. So the former Commissioner of Environment from Ontario, Gord Miller, and the former Commissioner of Environment for Quebec, Jean Sigmers, who had led this, and then we set up issue tables or special places where those 4 issue areas could be looked at. We had an inclusive process. We asked people with expertise and interest to be members of those issue tables and to help us write the action plan. And then Nicola Crawwall with Westbrook Communications served as a secretariat. So if you were involved in this, you worked with Nicola. We had, as this shot shows, experts directly involved. We had several meetings of the issue tables, webinars. We had a summit for the Great Lakes and a summit for the St. Lawrence. All this slide really is to show is that we did go through a process where we had several lots of people with a wide range of expertise and perspectives participate in this process. So let me turn it over to my colleague, Greg McClinchy, who can walk us through the key recommendations from each of the 4. And then I'll pick up the slideshow again and talk about what we're hoping the NGOs will do with this, with the results of this. So Greg, to you.
Thank you, Mark. So as Mark has mentioned, the report, the integrated report in particular, focused on key areas and provided an investment strategy for each of those key areas within the context of the larger plan. So firstly, and with respect to climate change, which is where the collaborative called for the largest investment, there was a call to create a joint office of shoreline climate change adaptation and resilience. This group was envisioned to spearhead the development of a regional shoreline resiliency strategy and some provincial action plans. And most importantly, it would also coordinate the actual implementation of these items to make sure that the job gets done. We didn't want it to be a theoretical exercise or one simply in exploring or researching a topic, but actually moving to an implementation phase. Next slide there, Mark.
There we go. There we go.
There we go. Secondly, on the subject of beaches and bacteriological contamination, the collaborative called for $33 million to do a couple of things. Firstly, to introduce a new risk-based categorization system for the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence beaches, but then to pair that system with a mitigation demand, a requirement that problems be fixed for beaches that have chronic contamination issues. Also to create and maintain a one-stop shop, if you will, with beach quality information that would be available to the public and to members of academia who wanted to study or to explore those issues to find additional solutions. And thirdly, it would propose to amend Public Health Ontario's public beach water guidance on test methods for E. coli, which would allow for some alternate testing methods. Next slide, Mark. There was also a $260 million focus on toxics that starts with strengthening standards and then to finding viable alternatives to many of the harmful pollutants that routinely show up in our water. So understanding what is plaguing us as a problem and trying to find innovative ways, not just to stop them from those pollutants from making their way into the waters, but to actually find ways of phasing them out so they're less of an issue should there be spills or accidental discharge. Mark. Now, next, the collaborative tackled the growing and longstanding problem of algae blooms by calling for a $400 million investment that would see the establishment of a Center for Water Quality and Nutrient Management. This group or this organization would go to work to review and adapt agricultural income support and technical programs to reduce water contamination, as well as providing technical assistance to farmers. So the theory being that by offering a dedicated network of workers with the training and expertise needed to provide consistent and reliable technical advice to farmers, we could actually and finally put an end to the finger pointing that has for too long hindered our ability to actually solve the problem and bringing farmers and other stakeholders into the fold and making all of them part of the solution rather than trying to ascertain or blame who might be at fault, but actually finding real solutions and incorporating those stakeholders, incentivizing their involvement and giving them the expertise and resources to actually become part of the solution. And lastly, the collaborative called for $560 million to address shortcomings in wastewater treatment facilities by providing real financial support to our municipalities, who are actually the owners of most wastewater treatment facilities, to upgrade and to install green infrastructure and to reduce the number of sewer outflows in priority sectors, to remove emerging contaminants and nitrogen, and to mitigate shoreline bacteriological pollution. We might finally put these problems to rest. As you can see, looking at these areas collectively, the plan is focused. It's ambitious, but it's focused, but it's truly action-oriented. That was one of the key demands of the steering committee, was to make sure that we come up with actionable items that could truly be made into a freshwater strategy, perhaps for Canada, but something that was actually tangible and ready to go, which is what makes this strategy or this document certainly different from other ones we've seen that have tried to address these problems. Mark, back to you.
Great. Yeah, thanks. We'll have a URL at the end of this for those who want to know where to get the full report and more information. The steering committee is essentially dissolved. The groups that I mentioned in the first slide, because the project is over, we've used the funds provided by Environment Canada, and we have submitted the report, and it is in the hands of government now. So when we got talking to Christy and others about sort of what steps are next, because we don't want this to collect dust. We want to see some implementation and action. With the fact that the funds are done, the steering committee doesn't exist. We wanted to talk about some of the things that we could do collectively, and then I wanted to talk a little bit about some of how this shook out in the United States, which could possibly inform how Canada and Canadian NGOs might proceed in the implementation and action part of this. There is some low-hanging fruit that we can do together, and I think our steering committee organizations will work together to organize. One being, for example, a Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Day or events in Ottawa. Many of you are aware of and maybe even participate in Great Lakes Days in Washington. Huge success, and it's been, had some great payoff in terms of investment in the Great Lakes. We've had a few already on Parliament Hill, and I can tell you that the interest is pretty high, so it's worth the squeeze if we decide to do that. In addition, we will go off and do meetings with the right people who sat on relevant committees or had a certain type of influence there. But what I'd like to talk a little bit about, Greg and I, for the remainder of the next few minutes, is ownership. And it's taking this action plan and strategy and running with it. And we turn again to the United States to kind of give an idea of what happened with that process. There were two things that happened. One was called the Great Lakes Regional Collaboration, and the other is the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. And they're not interchangeable, but they certainly are very, very closely related. And the reason why we do have north of $300 million invested in the Great Lakes every year, at least since 2010, for restoration. It has to do with process and relationships, NGO-driven advocacy, the existence of an action plan, and then a commitment to investment. Here's what happened in the United States. First was the establishment of process and relationships, and this was called the Great Lakes Regional Collaboration. It came about under an executive order that President George W. Bush signed in 2004. And the executive order called for a collaborative process to be set up that would be as inclusive as possible, and that would come up with an action plan for Great Lakes restoration. I remember this distinctly. I was at the Fishery Commission. This would have been about the year 2001 or 2002 even. And I would get calls from congressional staff who would say, my boss wants to know how much are we investing in Great Lakes restoration? And I couldn't answer the question, and nobody else really could, because we look at it from, well, I know that the Great Lakes Fishery Commission, our program does X, Y, and Z, and we get an appropriation of X amount of money. And the Fish and Wildlife Service could say what it did and all that, but there really wasn't a clear vision or an understanding really of what the investment was. So the president, after consulting Congress and governors, asked the federal agency, the US EPA, to, as a leader among equals, lead this process. The bottom photo there is the photograph of governors and key tribal representatives and some of the key players who were part of the regional collaboration. This was a kickoff with ceremony and bagpipes and music and a commitment to get the job done. It was held in Chicago in 2004. What happened is that this did two things. It established a process for how collectively we were going to develop that action plan. And it was not dissimilar from what happened in Canada just recently, where we established, we didn't call them issue tables. I can't remember what we called them actually, but it was similar to issue tables, where there were specific issue areas, and we assembled people to help in the development of the action strategy for that. And over the course of the year, we met frequently and also by teleconference. I staffed the development of the invasive species part of it, but there were others part of it too, dealing with habitat and water quality and so on and so forth. Again, about 1,500 people participated. It was a come one, come all if you like, if you have resources, if you have knowledge. And the process really did reflect the consensus of the group, of the participants. Second of all, it established relationships. We got to work with people that we didn't work with before. We didn't even know they had an interest in certain areas, say invasive species or whatever issue table we were working on. And those relationships still exist to this day. It was a less tangible part of the process, but incredibly important. And our hope was in modeling the Canadian process after that as much as possible, that there would be some new relationships constructed there. The second then, what happened was the establishment of some NGO-driven advocacy. About the same time that the regional collaboration was going on, some major foundations, mainly led by the Peter Wege Foundation in Michigan, established the Healing Our Waters Coalition, which is a coalition of NGOs. I'm just going to click through. I took this from the website. I don't even think this is an inclusive list, but it's a rather lengthy list of NGOs that have been participating in the Healing Our Waters Coalition. The purpose being not only to endorse and keep fresh the work of the regional collaboration and the strategy for the Great Lakes, but then also to commit their members and their resources to keeping the pressure on to the powers that be to make sure that the work that came about from the regional collaboration was actionable and had some resources put behind it. The Healing Our Waters Coalition is you can see this is a photograph from one of their fly-ins that they participate in the Great Lakes Day every year. And they really do a great job keep working together for the cause, but also to work with people like me and with Greg McClinchy and quasi-government and government organizations and industry to do that. They do it in a nonpartisan, action-focused way that really has gained a tremendous amount of respect over the past 15 years on Capitol Hill. I can't say enough in how important this ownership has meant to the cause and to Great Lakes restoration in the United States. Shortly after then, the Great Lakes Regional Collaboration convened in 2004. And I say we because I was a member of the Great Lakes Regional Collaboration and along with 1,500 other people, the Great Lakes Regional Collaboration strategy. So then we can go back to Congress now and we can say, here's the plan. If you make investments, this is where the biggest needs are. Here are the dollars that are connected to that. So this was not just a collaboration, a reflection of the consensus, but it was an actionable strategy for that. I included the table of contents there just so you can see the strategy team recommendations. So we call them issue tables in Canada. We call them strategy teams in the United States. Aquatic invasive species habitat, coastal health, areas of concern, non-point source, toxics, and indicators and information. Those were the strategy team areas. Incidentally, those were the areas developed collectively by the governors when asked what should we look at. In Canada, the issue areas were put forward by Environment Canada. But you can see that there's some similarity, and then the U.S. had a few other things. So we had the outcome of the regional collaboration that was driven partially by the Healing Our Waters folks was this action plan, and that was released in December of 2005. The final leg of this stool is investment. And we had the product then of President Bush's administration and it took an initiative of President Obama's administration to put some investment and resources behind that, and that's what the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative is. It's pretty connected to the action plan. Not, you know, I mean, 5 years had passed, so there was obviously some update and certainly some refinement in terms of the budget numbers, but all the groundwork that was laid starting in 2004 with the process and relationships, the NGO advocacy, and the existence of the action plan came to fruition in 2010 with the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. I put these photos of legislators up as representative of what we have going here. You know, the top are Michigan senators, Debbie Stabenow, Gary Peters, Democrats. The photo of the speaker on the House floor is Congressman David Joyce of Ohio, a Republican. Mr. Joyce has been the author of the authorization of the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. This is the kind of initiative where, and I think very much thanks to the NGO nonpartisan advocacy for this, we're in a place where, in a city where they can't agree that the sun rises in the east, that they will go to the mat for Great Lakes restoration, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative and recovery, in a bipartisan, in a nonpartisan way. Because, you know, you get between the Great Lakes and a legislator who wants to restore the Great Lakes, I don't care what their stripes are, you're going to have some problems. I'll give you an example of where that happened, actually, where when President Trump succeeded President Obama, his budgets zeroed out the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, about $300 million a year. And the loudest voices were in Mr. Trump's own party. The congressman news release you see on the left there, Congressman Bill Huizenga of Michigan, a Republican, who's also a co-chair of the bipartisan Great Lakes Task Force, was as disturbed as anybody about the president's budget that came out a few years ago that had $0 for the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. Mr. Huizenga, if I understand the narrative, rode out to Grand Rapids, Michigan with the president about the time this was happening. And lo and behold, in an almost unprecedented fashion, the president submitted a updated or an amendment to his budget, which, you know, again, almost never happens, that restored the Great Lakes. And now we have the administration behind, and we don't have to, the battle, you know, you have to fight to put money back into something. And we did that with great success over a couple of previous budgets from the president. But now that's not, we can direct our energies somewhere else. So we have, and I think, again, the fact that the Great Lakes are non-negotiable in restoration in this day and age is reflective of the consensus, the partnerships, the advocacy, and the bipartisan nature of this initiative. What we're hoping on behalf of the steering committee is that the same type of ownership, the same type of commitment from not just people like us who are in the government side of things and in agencies, but also then among the NGOs to advance Great Lakes and St. Lawrence protection would emerge. It didn't happen quickly in the US. Again, the Great Lakes Regional Collaboration Report was issued in 2005, and it took 5 years to get a commitment for the GLRI, but that's off and running now. And it's as close to sacrosanct as you can get in the US government and political system, just given the widespread support and tremendous level of success that the GLRI has had. So that's where we find ourselves. We find ourselves today with a report, a strategy that's reflective of the consensus. It was inclusive and it was collaborative. I hope new relationships were developed. We also find ourselves with some actionable items with dollars attached to it. We find, in my opinion, and I believe Greg McClinchy's opinion and other members of the steering committee's opinion, a receptive government and also receptive members outside of government. And we provided the roadmap for it. What we're hoping now is that we can get some emergence of some concentrated NGO support and advocacy for this as we move forward. And on the screen there is the URL if you have not read or seen this document. And I thank again Christy for organizing this, and really do appreciate the attendance on this. And I'll yield the rest back for any questions that anybody might have for Greg or me. Or Christy was a part of the steering committee, and I don't know if we have other steering committee members on as well, but they're welcome to pipe up if there's anything. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a few questions, and then I'm going to unmute everybody too. We only have 12 people, so I'm going to unmute everyone. If you're not talking, then I would just ask that you mute yourself. So just bear with me while I run through this. I don't know if you guys can see, Mark, at the top of your screen, since you're sharing, it will show your panel, and there's a question and answer, and there's 2 questions in there.
Yes.
And the first one says, how does or did this collaborative and action plan relate to the development of the lake-wide area management plans?
Thank you. That's a good question. And the LAMPS is required under a different process, and that is separate from this. Even though Environment Canada is, of course, deeply engaged in the development of the lake-wide area management plans, the collaborative was focused on those 4 areas, the issue tables, that is. And what we were hoping is that people who were engaged in other initiatives like the lake-wide area management plans would bring their perspective to the table and have that reflected in the discussion over the collaborative. So that's how it would get incorporated into that and reflected in the strategy. But this wasn't an exercise either to replace things that existed. It was effort to really identify what the key challenges are and then the resources needed to address them.
There's another question by Kelsey. Kelsey, you're welcome to unmute yourself and to ask it, or I can read it.
No, that's okay. I'm happy to chime in. Hi, thanks so much for the presentation. It was a really great process. Sorry, just a second. Really great process to be a part of at the issue table level. And so just in this scenario that we're in now, being in a stimulus situation for the next, foreseeable future, Environmental Defense has been trying to make the connection on actually implementing the action plan as a stimulus initiative. And the evidence from the GLRI in terms of economic spinoff and data has been kind of instrumental argument for us to make that case. And so I just wanted to maybe ask you both about that, see if you have any advice for making that connection, because I think, it will be so important in the next few years. And there is, as you know, really, really great economic data in terms of the spinoff communities have been able to realize with these investments in the US.
I'll defer to Greg, who's been engaged in some of this of late.
Yeah, now, so let me say first off that water governance, if I can use that term, in Canada is far from simple. It's pretty complex, as many on the call will know. There's currently more than 20 government departments and agencies that engage in the regulation and oversight of fresh surface water. So, while the collaborative's work was never intended to be the patch, it was intended, at least in part, to be the thread that bound the patches together. And I think Environmental Defense and other groups have really contributed to that work And I guess where we are now is we've got a cargo, we've got this report, we've got a number of NGOs and organizations that are working together. We've got a political climate that seems accepting or prepared to receive the notion. And what we're missing is the rudder on the ship. And with the dissolving of the steering committee, one of the things we wanted to throw out there into the ether today was to find if there's a willingness, if there's an appetite to take some of the lessons, some of the materials that we now have, and as the question has alluded to move it to the next level. We need to have a collaborative of groups that would come together and to help to champion this, to help advocate for this plan and the others that are out there, and to really bind those issues together and move it forward. What we don't want to see is for the work, of what is literally hundreds of experts to just sit on the corner of somebody's desk. We want to make sure that it moves to the center of the desk and is actually actionable, both by the Canadian Public Service bureaucracy, but also by the political leadership. And that's going to take some horsepower. So I know right now we have groups like ours, the Great Lakes Fishery Commission, certainly like the Cities Initiative and many others that are out there trying to advance, various pieces of the puzzle and of the plan. But the hope is that we might be able to form some kind of a new collaborative that might take this plan and the others that fit in with it, and begin to advocate for what truly is the first shot at a national freshwater strategy for Canada. We get to learn from all of the successes and even the failures that happened in the United States process, and take advantage of a real political opportunity that exists. And I guess this feeds somewhat into the next question that was asked is there's two components to that, but we need a willing partner, but we also need to have some resources. So from where do we derive those resources, and how do we really move this ball forward? But the short answer to the question, I guess that's the long way of getting to the short answer, which is we need people that are going to step up and provide leadership, much like the members of the steering committee did, and continue to take this to the next level.
And I'll add that we at the Fishery Commission and others have been talking with folks who are working on stimulus and green budgets and infrastructure and the like, to try and not only build awareness of the existence of the strategy, but then to say, here are some specific things that would be good to see in it. Eamon is on the line as well. He's with the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative, a member of the steering committee, and wanted to speak just a little bit to the economic spin-off of the green stimulus. And then I'll get to John Jackson's question.
Okay, I'll keep it very simple and just talk about stimulus. There's a lot of things I want to say because you guys have done some incredible work here, and I agree with a lot of what you're saying, but I'll stick just to stimulus. Understanding how important green stimulus is going to be, we're leveraging this report, the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Action Plan, and we're talking to members of Parliament all summer long. And they really, whether you be Conservative, NDP, or Liberal in Canada, they all see the value of green stimulus due to the high water levels that are affecting their communities. Well, they're not where they stand on the spectrum, they're seeing the effects locally, and they understand that when we have to create jobs, move from keeping people home to getting people back to work, that green stimulus is a way to do it. So there is a real appetite right now to move this forward. And I think collectively, if we could design some things that Greg and Mark have put forward, some upcoming events, something that can bring us all together, and we can have this unified voice on green stimulus, however you want to frame it, there's a real way to do that. Because starting to do a bunch of Conservative MPs last night, and we had this report out of the US that shows that for every $1 million put into waterfront restoration, it creates 40 jobs. The Conservatives ate that up. It's the best return on taxpayers' money for $1 million, make 40 jobs. Nothing makes that many jobs. And the Tories all love that because they see a tangible way to help their local communities, stimulate the economy, and build the green infrastructure for the future. So talk about those later.
And Eamon, I think you've stumbled onto that as well. That's where I was coming from when I said there's a real political opportunity here, because I think all of the major parties in Canada are receptive to the message. I think you've said it very well that that as we move into, hopefully as we move into what is a post-COVID environment where stimulus and so on becomes kind of the topic of the day, we would be remiss if we didn't seize the opportunity to advance this kind of thinking into that discussion, because with the makeup in the current House of Commons, with the potential for a spring election, if I can go out on the limb and say that, all of those kinds of things, I think the opportunity really is now. We have the work, so we have the basis for this. We just need the horsepower to kick this over the finish line, and that's really where we're coming from today.
John Jackson asked the question, and Greg alluded to it as well. Mark, WEGI gave dramatic dollars to the Howe formation. That's been essential to its success. Any ideas on how to get substantial funds for ENGOs on the Canadian side to do something similar? And in a way, John, that's the crux of the matter. I mean, WEGI did get things going, and it allows, even to this day, WEGI and some other foundations now, for them to have staff to do all that legwork to keep all of the ENGOs marching toward a same objective. And the WEGI money and the foundation money was great in that regard, in my opinion. It doesn't have to be the be all and end all. And I'll reflect on that first, but I want to actually throw your question to the group, because the people on this webinar are much better able to answer that question or provide a perspective than I am. I work for a quasi-government agency, and I don't deal with foundations all that much, except that I respect them and I get a chance to work with them. But that's not my world. And where the real important element about NGOs is that government is liable to listen to folks like you much more than sort of folks like me who I have an opinion and all that, but really the politicians want to hear from constituents and hear from the organized groups that have something to say. That's why the NGO organization is so important. But I can tell you that the Healing Our Waters Coalition did make a huge difference, and it is one model where you get a foundation to provide some money to keep all that going. It doesn't have to be the only model. If there was an NGO that had resources to provide a staff member, it takes organization is what it takes. It takes somebody to organize conferences and conference calls, and to make sure that one pager that's handed out on Parliament Hill that reflects the consensus of the organizations gets produced. And I know that's not free, it doesn't come easy, but there may be other ways to do that than just hoping that a foundation will rain money down and create a Healing Our Waters type organization. But other than that, I don't know the answer to your question, John, because I'm not as versed in how foundations work in Canada and where those funds would come from. And I think it would be a great conversation for the people on this webinar to reflect on that. Because maybe somebody has an idea and wants to take the lead in getting something together in that regard.
I just want to, I muted Kelsey because she had her hand up. So Kelsey might have some thoughts on this.
I do, yeah. I thought I would just, sorry, this is Kelsey with Environmental Defense again. I thought I would just kind of address that question a little bit, Mark, and just note that the foundation, the funding landscape in general in Canada for Great Lakes is very limited. And I mean less than $1 million for all of the groups, and that's freshwater actually, I believe. And to the point where, for many groups, we actually rely on US foundations for a lot of the work we do. And so not only is the funding space extremely limited in terms of the dollars that they have available, the dollars that are available are often US foundations that cannot support Canadian lobbying. So that's like a double limitation in terms of how we can resource this type of work. So that's one challenge, but I do wonder, I think in terms of getting funders' attention on this project, I wonder if it makes sense to build it and they will come in terms of, you know, and there's going to be limits into how effective a coalition and group can be to advance this work without those resources, like you point out, are so instrumental. But I'm curious to hear about with the How Coalition, a little bit more about the level at which that work was at before it got an injection of resources and dollars to take it to the next level, because that would be good for us to know, because I think there is interest among NGOs that work on this. There certainly is for myself to see this, you know, move forward. But just in terms of like the right timing as to like when everything comes together, and then when you get that injection of capital to really take it to the next level, like what does that look like? If you could expand on that a bit more, it might get some more thinking going on how to plan for that here.
So I might just add something really quickly. On the US side, like the foundations like Mott and Joyce Foundation have strict policies on lobbying. We always, like, it's education, we're educating. Now when you just, like when I have learned over my tenure, is that when you actually make the ask is that lobby part. And so typically we had used donor dollars for that, just as a clarification. But I don't know if, Mark, you want to answer the rest of that, and I can jump in a bit too. And I know John Jackson has his hand up, and he also was part of those early conversations as well with Healing Our Waters. When I was at the Ohio Environmental Council, I was as well.
Let's hear from John first, and then I'll try my best to go back in my memory on how it all happened. So,
am I there now? You can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I hopefully between our two memories we can, and three memories at least on the call. And at one point, actually, I was on the steering committee of HOW. I think I'm the only Canadian who's ever been on that steering committee. And I don't think we can understate how important that organization has been in terms of being pushing to get together the views of the NGOs as well as other allies to come up with the positions taking to Parliament. Well, it's not Parliament on the US side, obviously. And the staffing behind that has been absolutely critical. And so it wasn't just in the formation of it, but also in terms of keeping it going, because I think we won't achieve the real potential that is there unless we do have staff who are really dedicated, that's their job, that's what they're thinking of day to day, and with a range of skills there, as well as the ability to pay for costs to get environmental groups and other people to Parliament or to talk about these issues and to meet with their people and so on. That's been an important part of what HOW has done. And I think what was really important is that it was Wege Foundation who made the real initiative to have, I think it was a 2-day meeting I remember being held in Grand Rapids. In fact, I think at the time that I went there was a Wege big billboard up in town with a picture of the awful governors who were drinking the water out of the Great Lakes. It was a wonderful billboard. And where we all sat down with people that they invited and got there for a couple of days to really work through what we wanted to do and what we needed to do it. So I think it is really important to try to find some seed money to let us develop that. And part of that seed work then would be looking at ways to keep the funding going, to be able to get the funding. But we need to be able to define, I think, more clearly what the actual needs are in order for us to do it. And I think if we look at it in too small of a way, that sort of we'll do it, by the sort of ways that we generally organize with each other, which is really important. But it doesn't allow us to have some people who are really focused on it as their work and their job. I don't know the answer to that, and as Kelsey really said very clearly and accurately, sadly, the foundation money is very limited on the Canadian side on these sorts of issues. And I don't know if maybe there are other types of sources that we might be able to find that aren't the foundations. I don't know.
Let me add, John, I think that was well said. And, you know, I'm an outsider. I work for a government, technically not a government agency, but let's just call it a quasi-government, an official agency. And the value that we get from Healing Our Waters is tremendous. The research that they do, their perspective on the issues, and I agree with John. Their influence has not only grown over time, it's probably never been stronger, but it also evolves with the needs. So we're not stuck in just simply advocating. How is not simply advocating the GLRC, the Great Lakes Regional Collaboration Strategy, for example, or even limited to the GLRI. It's really are the united voice for the Great Lakes. And I have this great vision. If something could happen in Canada like that, it wouldn't have to be focused 100% on the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence strategy. It could go beyond that, you know, because there were elements also that were not included in the strategy that would be important. But it's the organization. I've forgotten about that. It was like a retreat. I wasn't there because it wasn't for agencies like ours, but it was a retreat-like setting with a big name, Peter Wege. How could you say no to Peter Wege with the foundation there? And they worked out a strategy. All this was going on about the same time that the regional collaboration was formed in 2004. And so I don't technically know which preceded what, but let's just say they were happening simultaneously. Things really came to a head about that year when Congress wanted to do something for the Great Lakes. And as I said, we didn't have a good answer. Wege saw an opportunity. President Bush signed the executive order, and things just, they came out together. It was, if it wasn't planned, it was just great timing. But I think that I think Peter Wege saw an opportunity and really started helping to have how gel about all that time.
Yeah, if I may just quickly add, so great synopsis. When I was at OEC, I was on the board and remember all of this being developed too. I just want to note that, yes, Healing Our Waters works on more than just the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, but they're not the voice for the whole Great Lakes because there are some things that they don't lead on, but that they may support just for clarification purposes, because there's a lot of things that are happening at the Great Lakes level and they're not leading it. But they are nonetheless essential in making sure that, you know, like we're restoring the Great Lakes. They've really taken on Asian carp and like the Clean Water Act, some rollbacks and things like that. So very important things nonetheless.
And Christy, thank you for saying that, because to really reinforce that, that is an important thing, that Howe didn't sort of take over the Great Lakes programs that the Angos were working on. It took a set of them that were really focused on the federal level, legislative level. That's sort of where it keeps its focus, and therefore is seen as a helpmate to everyone rather than a competitor if they were trying to do all the other things as well that environmental groups are doing on the Great Lakes. It's an important distinction, Christy.
It's a voice focusing mechanism too, you know.
And I think, sorry, John, if I can just add to that too, I think you've raised a really important point that we wanted to make today, which is we're not necessarily hoping, well, although it would be great if we did, but that we skip to the end and suddenly we find some agency or a foundation with deep pockets that can just make this all happen. You know, there's an angle here that says if we can, as a number of small groups, work together in smaller ways, you know, you have to walk before you can run. You know, there are lots of examples of groups in Canada right now that work in that manner. The Cities Initiative being one of them, the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters being another, where they use a piecemeal approach and it's eventually built into something more. The collaborative itself would never have been able to achieve what it achieved without having the advantage of Niccolo in the Secretariat. So even if we were able to, amongst us, kind of generate some interest or ability to assign one person to begin that work, to begin ferreting out other opportunities and build slowly, it's certainly better than skipping to the end, or better than ignoring it. And we might not be able to skip to the end, but we might be able to start somewhere in the middle.
And I know it's
So-
probably too much to ask for this webinar to walk away with an idea on that, but I would ask Christy and the others on here to continue to think about how that could happen. You know, maybe, I don't know if the foundations is not a way to go, are there other sources, you know, corporate donors that want to do good with money? Would there be a leader among equals of the ENGOs in Ontario and Quebec that would put in the in-kind work for, you know, the next 6 months to organize this? I don't know, but you know, there are other ways to do that without having a Peter Wege just do that.
So we're coming up on the hour. I think, yes, continuing, sorry, Craig, this conversation and thinking through what that could look like. I guess I wonder about next steps. And so, you know, what does that look like? I would think that if there are some people on the phone that would be interested in jumping on another, like maybe a Zoom call, although we're all going to be Zoomed out by the end of all of this, Zoom call and like a meeting, a small meeting to kind of brainstorm ideas and think through this a bit more. I'm assuming that we're all open to that. So I guess I would ask who that's remaining on this call is interested in that conversation.
It's Eamon here. I'm very interested. I do think we have to find ways for this group to stay together one way or the other. Ideally, it is with new money, but in the short term, if we don't have new money, are there landmark events we can all work towards? Just working toward various business plans or corporate strategies like, hey, end of November, we're all going to try to do something together and, you know, have a similar effect. It won't be coordinated by a third party. It will be coordinated by just off the side of our desks. But I like the idea if we build it, they will come. If we start showing that we're doing activities, start showing some success, hopefully people take notice and start providing funding. So I'm open for any conversation soon.
Good.
This is Kelsey. I'm same thing and looking forward to future conversations.
Same here.
I was just going to say, can I volunteer you?
I can't, we can't see the participant list to know who else is on the call.
Oh, I was, okay, well, April's on too from Canada. I'm putting her completely on the spot, so I'm sorry, April. I just don't know if this is something that you and, so just let us know.
So sorry, it's Eamon here. Is the request, is someone willing to set up or organize the next call? Is that the request right now on the table?
Well, I mean, I'm happy to just facilitate that.
Because I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to
Okay.
work with people to find the next date and work with people to try to find, you know, a common agenda, and then use that as a jumping off point to try to say, okay, without any new funding, what can we start doing together? And part one, part two, where do we start looking for more funding to take this to the next level? Would that be acceptable? And please, everyone push back and challenge and, you know, not try to drive the agenda, just try to facilitate moving forward.
I guess my question is, Christy, do you have a, I think that's really important. I appreciate that, but I have no, if it's just the three of us or four of us, it needs to be a few other people, I think, as well. And do you have a broader list that have said they're interested, or Christy or anybody else?
So this is, from my perspective, this is a conversation that a few, like I know I've talked to Mark before about this. I know there have been some other conversations, And I've also talked to, just to kind of feel out some things in Canada, Raj, who is not on the call anymore, and Kelsey. But I guess I get the sense, and everybody that's part of the collaborative can correct me if I'm wrong, is what we are looking for is a group of people that are interested in having a conversation and sitting down and thinking through what this could look like, how we can move forward. And it's not just off to the side of somebody's desk. Because I think like John and Mark and like we've said, is that it's going to take real commitment. It's going to take people resources. It's going to take funding to be able to get this done. Is that a fair assessment, Mark and Greg?
Yeah, most definitely.
And I guess if you have ideas of who else should be in that conversation, like I think of Raj, and I'm not sure, I know April's chatted something. So, if there are others too, then I think everyone's open to who they are.
So it sounds like maybe you and Eamon can talk about another call, and we can all contribute to thinking about an agenda too on that. But I think the agenda needs to be exactly kind of what you said, is sort of like, well, how do we make this happen? And you can learn from how to the extent that it's relevant, and chart your own path as well, to the extent that it's reflective of the reality of Canada, and go from there.
And perhaps we can also give some thoughts to the guest list. Are there other people that should be included that we can expand and work within the larger community?
So Eamon, I'm happy for you to do all that. If you need support, let me know.
Yeah, I'm sending me a request for Friday or something so I can talk and I could get some guidance on I'm sending something right now.
Okay. And then in the meantime, if you guys have ideas of who else should be at the table, feel free to email me. I can pass it along. Greg or Mark. And then we can, get that going.
Okay.
Well, thank you again for organizing this. It was really good to meet y'all virtually. Some I don't know, and I like the next steps. So we'll forge ahead.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.
Stay safe.